Hi, this is Russell Colts, and in this short video I'd like to talk a little bit about compassion. In compassion-focused therapy, we use a pretty standard definition of compassion, which is pretty consistent with how people talk about compassion from the dictionary to the Dalai Lama. Our definition for compassion, really, my favorite way to say it is being moved by suffering and being motivated to alleviate and prevent it. Maybe a more standard way of stating the definition would be having a sensitivity to suffering and a corresponding motivation to alleviate or prevent that suffering. So the important thing about this definition is that it really anchors compassion to the experience of suffering. So a lot of times there's confusion about compassion, and people will confuse compassion with simply being nice or maybe more accurately being kind. But it's important to note that it's kind in the face of suffering. Compassion begins with the willingness to turn toward suffering and struggle and difficulty, and to engage with it to try and make things better. And so that's what distinguishes compassion from things like loving kindness or other things where you're interacting kindly and helpfully with others, or even with yourself, but it isn't necessarily in a context of working with suffering. Compassion is always anchored to the experience of suffering. Now, in terms of actually assessing compassion, that's a little trickier because, we could come up with assessment instruments that just get at that definition. To what extent are you sensitive to the experience of suffering? To what extent are you motivated to do something about it? But if you look at the scales that are used to assess compassion, these researchers have worked to go a good deal further to ask questions like, well, what does compassion look like when it's manifested? So not just like in terms of a theoretical definition, but when we actually behave compassionately, when we actually see compassion being played out, what sort of things are involved? And at those points, you start getting at other aspects or sort of components of compassion, which make it a little trickier to assess. And what we find is that actually there's quite a lot of things that go into what compassion looks like when it's being manifested in the real world. So in compassion-focused therapy, as you'll see in CFT Made Simple, we've divided that into a number of components, including things like sympathy, empathy, distress tolerance, non-judgment, those sorts of things. So we'll be getting into those in the future, but it's important to recognize that compassion can be kind of tricky to operationalize in terms of assessment and research because there are actually quite a few processes that contribute to it when it's actually being acted out and manifested in the real world. So hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.